All right. Folks, I apologize. I really sincerely meant to be in the school today, but my quite honestly, my doctor, if he would have seen me, would probably had a heart attack. No, I should not be in walking around in very bad conditions with my leg, thinking I'm invulnerable. I'm not I'm not 18 anymore. I'm not even 58 anymore. So I'm going to protect myself. So anyway, let's go ahead and start. First off, can you all hear me? Everybody can hear me. Everything's good. We're okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. All right. So this is a chapter, or this section of chapter six is very, very near and dear to my heart. I was in retail for 25 years. I actually still do private consulting work now. I am a big fan of channels. When I got started getting my PhD, I wanted to specialize in supply chain and channels. But in 2006, marketing or place was not the everything, all of that. You got to realize is that for the last 30 or 40 years, marketing has gone through a renaissance, especially when it comes to supply chain and consumer behavior. We channels folks, we're in the back row of the bus. They didn't, they had us along, but they figured supply chain would do all the rest of that stuff and everything was fine. I even wrote a paper, a thought piece. I was trying to find it for you called "Is This Place Still Have a Place?" And I wrote that in my first year of PhD school. However, around 2003, Best Buy was experimenting in a concept known as the omni-channel, which is where we are now. And I'll finish talking about the omni-channel. And the omni-channel has fundamentally changed everything that we know about channels. Now, I have three sections of supply chain with standing room only, and if I wanted to, I could probably have two more at the same time. What makes channels so great, by the way, folks, if you're looking for a direction to go, is that channels is the last great frontier. We've done product to death. We've done price to death. We've done promotion to death. But place is the last brave frontier for those of you out there who are looking to stake. Not only that, but yes, it is different from supply chain, and we'll talk about those things as well. So you're going to get like a Sado kind of grab from things that I talk about in my undergrad, plus things in the graduate, and we're going to hodgepodge all of these together to something really brilliant. Okay. So without further ado, let me go ahead and start the ball rolling because I'm sure you're sick of me talking. So, we talked about the strategic combination of the four marketing mixes. We've talked about product and we've talked about price. And now we're moving into that hollow land that I like to talk about, and that is supply chain strategy. You will not use supply chain, you're going to use channels. Okay. So when we're talking about the four P's, you're not going to say supply chain strategy. We're talking channels. And I will give you the reasons why. Okay. So I'm going to offer OC to rewrite this section for him just because I don't know. I'm going to tell OC Farrell, who's written 45 books and 100 and no, 200 journal articles in his career, how to write his channel section. Yeah, I'm that arrogant. So anyway, what is channels or what is channels is an organized system of marketing institutions that facilitate the flow, the products and the resources and the information of product ownership from the point of production to the final user. Yes, that's one of the definitions that you go with. However, channels is much more than that. Let me give you a definition which I think is more valued, and this is the one I want you to use. Channels is a set of interdependent organizations that are involved in the process of making a product available for use or consumption. Channels is not just one organization, it can be, but many times it is multiple organizations. As a matter of fact, the more members that are in the channel system, the greater the probability that it is an efficient channel. Efficient channels have more members in them doing more specialized functions. That's what a good marketing channel system is. It is a set of interdependent organizations that are independent of each other. It means that in channel systems, all of the organizations have their own balance sheets, their own income statements, their own mission statements, their own objectives. All of those are unique, but they come together for a common goal of providing goods and services to a chosen consumer segment. It is important to also understand that channels is a process. It is not an event. Channels evolve over time, but the difficult thing about channels is it's a horrendously expensive. Of all of the four P's, there is nothing more expensive or more time consuming than channels, because when you realize it is a series of independent organizations that are interdependent on each other, that all of those things can lead to chaos eventually. And so, physical distribution is for those two channel functions that we consider of, which is the coordination of information and products. Usually you're talking about physical possession of goods, but also the ownership of those goods as well. The physical possession and ownership in channels are separate from each other because they usually go together, but they are different items. We can find many examples. I can go to Walmart, where Walmart in many ways is a consignment store. So what does that mean? Walmart, many of the goods that are inside Walmart does not actually pay for the goods in their stores until they're actually bought by the consumer. Now, just think of the power it takes for Walmart to do that. They don't even guarantee the goods can be sold. They will buy those goods net 45 when they're actually bought by the consumer. That's an example where physical possession and ownership are actually separate. But yes, they generally go together. Okay. Now, supply chain is the integration of the members in the marketing channel, but it's from a different direction, because supply chain is what it sounds like, supply. It's not demand change, and that's what marketing is. So let's talk about the players inside a traditional marketing channel system. And so, who participates in the marketing channel? Well, in the channel, marketing channels, we only have three entities in the entire channel system. Number one is the manufacturers. We call them manufacturers or producers, whatever you wish to call them. They tend to be the prime movers in establishing and maintaining the channel links. They're usually considered the top of the tree. They can be what's called the channel captain, or they don't have to be. A channel captain is that corporation which is the prime mover of creating the channel system itself. Now, traditionally, manufacturers have held that position up until the mid-90s, around 94, 95, 96, when Parasimon wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review that says that the channel captains, in essence, are the drivers of the marketing channel system, are no longer the manufacturers. They are now a very I wouldn't say, excuse me, a generalized intermediary, a retail outlet now has become the channel captain. And of course, if I'm talking the 90s, without further ado, we're talking about Walmart. Walmart fundamentally changed channel environments to where the channel captains, the power in the channels became with the retailers instead of the manufacturers. And we're still dealing with that right now. And then finally, we have end users. So why do we have end users? Let's start talking about these entities one at a time. So the first is the manufacturer. The manufacturer is those upstream channel members. They are those producers or the originators of the product or the service that is being sold. Now, the manufacturers can have branded manufacturing or branded merchandise, or they can be private manufacturers that they do not invest in the building of their own brand name. So, what would be an example? A brand manufacturer would be quite simply like Apple. All right. They brand their products. They're known to end users for that particular item. That would be an example. And that beautiful little Apple logo on the back is worth 35% margin when it comes to buying their laptops, as opposed to 6% when we're talking Dell. So, branded manufacturing. Private label manufacturer do not invest in building a brand, but they build a product that they ultimately allow others to distribute. So way back in the 80s, back when I was a manager of a computer store, back when those things existed in the 80s, um, we had a manufacturer, or we would build our own computer systems. They were called well, excuse me. We would buy machines that were manufactured within 90% of completion, and then we would put our own things in, like specialized video cards and high resolution monitors. Yeah, we were kit bashing folks before there was ever a word called kit bashing. So we'd come up with really cool ways to take V20 processors and speed up the regular Z80s. I mean, we're talking like 8 megahertz, man. You have no idea. 10 meg hard drives. Talk about a boss system. Anyway, I'm sorry. There was one manufacturer of motherboards that we considered to be very reliable. At that time, everybody's had their own experience, but it was a company by the name of Asus. Asus is a Taiwanese manufacturer that builds OEM, original equipment manufacturing components for other producers. So they built motherboards. They also built video cards. They built all sorts of things, but generally, unless you were in the business like myself, you didn't know who they were. Well, guess what happens? Asus has a very good reputation at that time. So they actually start getting known by others outside. And before you know it, the private label Asus becomes a branded manufacturing, and now you can find Asus products everywhere. In 1995, when IBM was creating their ThinkPad, they had a manufacturer who actually started building for them instead of having theirs built out of Boca Raton in Florida. So a company by the name of Lenovo started building the original IBM ThinkPad. And in 2007, when IBM decided they're gone, they don't want to be in the business anymore, they sold that entirely to Lenovo. I love Lenovo products. In my own personal experience, we all have had our own different ones. But for me, it is rock solid, built well, engineering is awesome, and they've gone from a private label to a brand. So I just want you to know that the upstream members can build their own products. They in essence can build products that don't put their own brand name. It's just whoever starts the flow. Also, by the way, just realize it doesn't mean that you can't have services in there instead of the upstream members, instead of building products. An example would be H&R Block. Their particular technology, especially when it comes to auditing, that unique kind of section allows them to send services down the stream, even though there is no physical product being built. So, manufacturers. The next are what are called intermediaries. Intermediaries are any channel member other than the manufacturer or the end user. Any channel member is an intermediary if you're not a manufacturer and you're not an end user. So we're going to talk about 3 types of intermediaries, which we've all have some familiarity with: wholesalers, retailers, and specialized intermediaries. A lot of these things, by the way, I'll talk in conversation, so you might hear me repeat myself. Just figure he's an old guy and he doesn't remember things, okay? So let's talk about them one at a time. So, a wholesaler basically is a channel intermediary who, by tradition, sells to other channel intermediaries. So, it means that they would sell to retailers. They might also sell to value added resellers who take that product, make it unique, and resell it to someone else. What is critical about a wholesaler is that they take both title and physical possession of the manufactured goods. And that's a critical thing to note because a wholesaler, once you take title and you take physical possession, you set prices. Not only that, but it means that the manufacturer, unless he has a very close association with the wholesaler, at that point, the manufacturer has no ability other than contracting to be able to, let's just say, coerce the wholesaler into doing things in the way that they want. Because wholesalers make their money on that marked up price, and their major function is in the promotion of those particular goods and the negotiation that's required between them and the retailers. Now, I want you to get in your mind a concept more in supply chain and demand chain and channels. And those are the concept of push and pull through the system. In the traditional system, when we're looking at supply chain, excuse me here, and we look at the three key entities in the traditional functions, the way it works, manufacturers have manufacturers agents and they have their own personal sales and they push the goods, they sell directly to the wholesalers and perhaps the retailers. So the goods and the selling gets pushed through the system. The wholesalers have their own agents and brokers and their own salespeople, and they push the goods and sell to the retailers. The retailers sell and push their goods to the end user, and then ultimately the end user purchases the product. And so this is the concept of push. Starting from the manufacturer, they push the goods through, the intermediaries push the goods downward, and then finally it ends up to the end user. Marketing, which believes in demand versus supply, says no, 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 no. If you want to start that whole flow going, you advertise directly to the end user. You advertise directly to the end user. You hopefully stimulate some kind of desire. There is demand there, which is the consumer's desire to have that product with the ability to pay for it, and demand pulls the goods through the system. And so think about those differences and think about that also when we're going to start talking about marketing strategy. Push is where the manufacturers and the the channel members, see, you got me doing it. The channel members push the goods down. In marketing in the classic channel, you appeal to the end users create demand, and the demand pulls the goods through the system. Okay? So, got those all straightened out, push and pull. So, we talked about the middle channel members. We talked about wholesalers and what their goods are. Retailers are basically those who sell to individual consumers for their own private, personal consumption. Retail sales sell to consumers for their own private personal consumption. How do you tell the difference between a wholesale sale and a retail sale? I walk into Staples. I buy a ream of paper. A ream is 500 sheets that you would get, like just that clump that you would put inside of a copier. I take that paper home and I allow my daughters to draw on it and use it for their homework. That is a retail sale. It is for my own personal consumption. I go to Staples the next day. I buy a ream of paper. I use that ream of paper to print out flyers and handouts, and I use them in the production of an article that I'm writing to hopefully convince consumers to buy my product. That is a wholesale sale. That is when the consumption of the good is used in the promotion or the creation of another good. So, how do we get between a retail sale and a wholesale sale? It all comes down to the buying motive. The buying motive of the individual who buys ultimately determines whether or not it's a wholesaler or retail. Now, I want you to think about that, okay? I want you to consider that. And you can see also why sometimes it's very difficult to be able to separate those two. And in essence, how we treat them as consumers are a little bit different because the wholesaler tends to want information more technical in variety, whereas the consumer is probably banking on their own personal consumption, but they move kind of in the same direction. Okay. So, wholesale intermediaries, retail intermediaries, and then specialized intermediaries. Now, I said earlier that the specialization of intermediaries or the more members is actually the sign of a more efficient system. And I'm going to give you an example. A specialized intermediary tends to be an individual an institution that is inside the channel, which is not directly involved with the movement of goods through the system, generally. That doesn't mean that there aren't 4GPLs out there, third-party logistics providers who move back and forth goods. But generally, specialized intermediaries really only look at one function. So let me give you an idea. The big one to me is finance. So if any of you think of like modern Subaru or modern Toyota, and I might have talked about this before, but just consider the amount of money that is on the table to be able to have modern Subaru be able to sell as many cars as they have. I asked a retail sale, what was it, Anniston, Alabama, a little small town. I asked how many cars, used cars, they sell a month because they just started doing them online. They sold 48 cars a month. It is incredible the amount of volume that can go even through a small place. But just think of modern Subaru, and in their franchise, they have to get 100, let's just say 100 cars, 100 Subarus every month. How do they do that? Just think of what the cost that's associated with buying one car. Let's just say the base price or the base cost is $20,000. That's $2 million. How does a company like Modern Subaru do that without tying up all of its capital? This is what they do. So they've got to buy 100 cars every month, got to sell them as well. So beginning of the month, Modern or Subaru corporate calls up and says, "Okay, your allotment is 100 for this month." And Modern Subaru says, "Hey, that's great. Let me go talk to GE Capital. I'll call you back." So Modern Subaru, Ian Boone, calls up GE Capital and says, "Look, I have to have credit for $2 million for 100 cars." And GE will say, "No problem. I'll write the check." A lot goes on before that, but let's just leave it at that. So GE Capital writes a check for $2 million, sends it to Subaru Corporate, and Modern Subaru gets its 100 vehicles. In the space of the month, let's say they sell 80 of those 100 cars. At the end of the month, what Modern Subaru does is write a check to cover those 80 cars that they sold and to and to pay for those remaining 20, just the interest payment on those remaining 20 cars that are still in stock, plus the interest payment that they had on having the cars theirs for 28 days. This is an example of how a specialized intermediary acts as a catalyst. They don't necessarily do all the heavy lifting in the business, literally, but without them to be there to process and perform that financial function, modern Subaru or most modern business as we have now just simply couldn't exist. And so this is an example of a specialized intermediary. So, manufacturer at the top or producer, originator, whatever you want to call them. The intermediaries in the media in the middle, generally wholesalers, retailers, and specialized. And then the last one, which we have in our group, where's my mouse? There I am, is the end user. And this is a major difference between us and supply chain. The end user. Why do channels consider the end user to be a member of the channel system? Test question. Because the end user oftentimes performs channel functions. And so, what does that mean? Anybody of you who has a Costco account, and I've talked about Costco before, think about how Costco works in its model. Costco only makes money on their subscription fees. They make no money whatsoever in selling the goods that they can. Well, how are they able to even make that halfway profitable? Well, one of the things that they do is that Costco sells, in other words, they don't do one of the major things that most modern retailers do, and that's break bulk. If you're going to buy toilet paper at Costco, if any of you have, you're buying it in the 250 roll sizes that are gigantic, and you as a consumer perform the channel function, excuse me, the service output of breaking bulk. You do that for you. In the 70s, when we had the first great embargo, where OPEC, the oil producing, exporting countries, decided that they were going to embargo the United States over Iran, one of the things that, in order to save money, is that you found that corporations were willing to allow consumers to pump their own gas. Now, think about that. I lived in a day where you didn't pump your own gas. You would drive into a service station. The service station at 19 cents a gallon was making enough money to have someone clean your windshield, pump your gas for you, do all the change for you, and let you drive away, and you never got out of your car. Incredible, isn't it? Yes. And I believe there's some that still do that. Okay, so channels has three members and three members only. The manufacturers or the producers or the originators. The intermediaries who are neither the excuse me the intermediaries who are neither the manufacturers or the end users. Excuse me. Or the end users who perform channel functions. Okay, so without further ado, let's move on. Forgive me if I sound a little passionate. This is really my wheelhouse. I was in retail for 25, 30 years. I think it's a great place to be. I also think supply chain is awesome. If you're looking for a place to go and you're really good with numbers and you're motivated, supply chain or channels is a great place. Okay, so we talked about physical distribution and the goods flowing back and forth, and supply chain, which is the integration of the members in the channel, but not quite because supply chain doesn't have the end user in it. Okay. So, what are some of the factors? How connected are we in terms of information and technology? How are we able to clearly connect and put together our goals and objectives between the firms? And do we recognize the mutual interdependence between those firms itself? Those are important issues and vital ones that have to be solved. Sometimes they can be solved quite simply because one channel member is so strong that you simply can't do without them. So there are these factors that are how we go about having successful supply chain. Ooh, I hate saying supply chain channels. I'm going to rewrite all these. Anyway, what is the most important thing to be able to connect them all together? Trust. All right. I'm going to throw away everything else. You know, interdependence and cooperation, stability, mutual benefit doesn't happen unless there is mutual trust between all of the parties involved. And that's all I'm going to say on that particular slide. But I'm also going to talk to you about one of the reasons why channels is so valuable. They provide time, place, and possession utility, and I'm going to show you an example of that especially. Time utility is the ability to having the goods at the right moment that you need them. Place utility is having them in the right location exactly at the moment that you need them. And possession utility is the ability or the facilitation process to have a consumer have their good at the time that they need them. An example of possession utility for any of you who perhaps have not had the luxury or the joy of going into a big dealership and getting a particular vehicle, usually what happens is, I might have told you this before, is before you take your test drive, they've already taken a look at your car, looked up the VIN number, figure out its particulars, and then what usually will happen is that when you come home, they'll say, why don't you take that car for the weekend, the car that you were just driving? They bring your car in. Before you know it, on Monday, they've got the contract all ready to sign with a nice, sizable down payment based upon the vehicle. This is an example of possession utility where they facilitate the process of owning the vehicles. Lots of good things. Let me show you one of the great things that supply chains do and why bigger systems are actually better systems. So let's just say your mom and pop stores, and as a mom and pop store, convenience store, you sell the big items, all the sin things, all the reasons for getting up in the morning. You sell tobacco, you sell candy, you sell soft drinks, and you sell beer. And let's just say, for the sake of this universe, there's only one seller of those particular goods that exist anywhere. So what it means is that as a mom and pop retailer, I have to go to 4 different corporations in order to be able to buy my goods. Not only that, but let's think about the way that those goods are made. When I'm looking at manufacturers of tobacco, of beer and soft drinks, they build things not in 6-packs, but in pallets. In other words, they sell things to have the most efficient economies of scale, and it means that they will sell things on the bottom part's called a skid or a pallet, but it would be 4 feet by 4 feet on a square up to 6 feet high of that particular good. And so kind of put that idea in your head. Now think about one of these small mom and pop stores, and can you imagine what it would take for them to try to buy a pallet worth of goods, or even worse, the wasting of those particular goods? Not only that, but you'd have to negotiate contracts for each one. Those individual 10 retailers at the bottom, those mom and pop stores, quite simply don't have the buying power to be able to buy to all 4 of those. However, put a wholesaler in the middle. Put a wholesaler whose specialty focuses on mom and pop convenience stores. He knows or she knows the individuals in those particular stores intimately. They understand their normal workloads. They understand when their buying times are the best. Even more so, they might even understand when they have fluidity, when they have the money to be able to buy. Let's also see what happens to the retailers. The retailers can basically put together all of the requirements that they have, and one wholesaler can take all of those requests and go to all of the manufacturers and be able to, with a certain amount of power, be able to have the efficiencies or the economies of scale. Now, the wholesaler gets those goods, the beer, the soft drink, the candy, and the tobacco. The wholesaler can warehouse those goods. Instead of having to drive all of those goods to the retailers at one time, they can put those goods away and ship those goods when the mom and pops are required them. This is an example of a powerful centralized system that happens with channels that couldn't happen without this structure. And this is an example where the more members in a system, the better the system is, and more the specialized individuals make the system work. And so this is an example. Instead of 40 contact lines and negotiations that each one of those retailers have to do, the retailers, here's where trusts come in, trust the wholesaler to be able to represent them in the best way possible and get the best deal that they can. And the wholesaler, they make their money on the margins of selling between the two and perhaps even expanding into other things by being able to provide outlets for those particular retailers. An example of this also is when Subway first started going to mom and pop stores, they lowered their franchise fees to the point where any mom and pop store, if they have the proper facilities and do all the proper things, could be able to sell. Long story getting longer. I can't say enough good things about channel systems, and large channel systems are signs of efficient channels. And so they provide time, space, possession. They minimize the total cost by balancing the needs of the customer and the organization. And as you very well saw, as they strength grows and they get larger, they actually become more efficient. And so, what are the basic benefits of supply chain? Oh, shut up, David. Channels, okay? Channel functions, and what are the things that they do to their advantage? So, if you look at the functions now, we'll talk about them one at a time. One of the first is sorting. And so, in any good store situation, like we're looking at the mom and pop retail outlets, if you go into one mom and pop store, there's a generally good feeling that you know that particular kinds of aisles kind of sort themselves out. There'll be an aisle for like small goods, like small things like for making sandwiches and those kind of things. You may find loaves of bread. You'll find a section where there's going to be soft drinks, sections, of course, behind the counter where there's tobacco. You understand all of those things. Sorting is one of those efficient things that good stores will do that that are very successful in retail outlets. If you go into any supermarket, a supermarket has anywhere from 50 to 150,000 separate items. How do you know where everything is? Well, by sorting and sorting in reasonable ways, we can go through just about every store and know where everything is. The next is breaking bulk. So it is not surprising that the smaller that an item is, the price goes up higher and higher. Why is that true? Because in breaking bulk, what you're doing is you're taking large sections into manageable, smaller sections that are more realizable to the desires of the consumer. And so Any of you who go away for a weekend, like one of our favorite places, we have a timeshare in Myrtle Beach, but we like to also go to Surfside Beach in New Bern and other places like that. One of the things that my super efficient wife, Dr. Albinson, does is that she has like this go-to kit of cleaners and those things that she carries with her. And one of the things, of course, is a small bottle of Palmolive. And the interesting thing about it is that small bottle of Palmolive, she bought it at a convenience store at one time, cost the exact as a bottle of Palmolive that was 20 ounces. Why? Because that particular size, that breaking bulk into smaller categories, is more idealized for what the consumer desires. And so it is not unusual to have smaller sizes be more valued than bigger sizes. It is also why, depending on the shopping experience, and we'll talk about that as well, is that a small Coke, a 20-ounce Coke, is actually less expensive than a liter bottle at the local supermarket. So sorting and breaking bulk, maintaining inventories, of course, is important and valuable, but not only is maintaining inventories, but also the closest convenient locations as possible. A really good example of convenient locations is the entire concept that Dollar General goes through. So, if I were to look at Dollar General's has finally started slowing down. There are like 19,000 locations in 38 states in the United States. But I also want you to think about when it comes to convenience in the locations, consider that if you look at the Dollar Generals, they tend to be between cities, not in cities, or let's just say rarely, or if they are in cities, they tend to be on the side of the street where consumers are going out of the city. And so if we look at the Dollar Generals inside of Boone, it's not surprising that the one going towards Wilkesboro is on the right side of the road, right there next to the New Market Shopping Center. And then the other Dollar General, the one on 421 going towards Tennessee, that one is on the right side going out of town as well. That is an example of a marketing channel function when it comes to convenience. And then finally, services, which are extremely valuable because services are that way to make ourselves unique and special in relationship to other competitors that are out there. If I can provide a valued service, then what I have done is make that particular item even more valued. Now, it is true what it says at the bottom. The functions must be performed regardless of who does them. I can get rid of a channel member who performs the function of breaking bulk, but the function itself has to be performed by someone. That is an important, valuable thing to know. If I change who does my financing, or let's just say I eliminate that person completely, it does not eliminate that particular function that has to be done. Okay. Now, if we remember when we talked about the product, one of the things that we talked about is especially consumer product categories. And those particular product categories, if we remember convenience goods, shopping goods, luxury goods or exclusive goods, and then unsought goods, each one of those is going to have their own particular reason or their way in which those goods are going to be shipped across their particular territory. It's also important to say the distribution signals to the consumer what particular product those are. And so if I'm looking at specialty goods or luxury goods, the way that I want to be able to distribute those is through an exclusive distribution. Usually what that means is you give one merchant or one outlet the sole right to sell within a defined geographic region. Generally, exclusive distribution, exclusivity is geography. That's generally the way it works. I would say with retail outlets in general, when we're talking about that, usually the categories, or let's just say the boundaries, are usually thought of into physical existence. One area has this versus another. Now, if I have a shopping good, if those particular goods, let's say, are electronics, and those electronics are goods that, in order to see the substantial differences or why I should spend more money for OLED or QLED versus 4K, it seems like they would be all the same. Then what I'm going to want is I'm going to want a location where I can actually see those differences. Even if I'm showing off another item that is similar, which is substantially less expensive, it helps to also explain the differences as why one is less expensive than another. Shopping goods demand selective distribution. Selective distribution is where you have several merchants or outlets with the right to sell a product within a defined geographic region. You actually, without the shopping category built into it, um, you are not going to be able to sell as well because shopping goods encourage comparisons. And so selective distribution. It's also important to understand when you think of the manufacturer and the special or the intermediaries, their mindsets in between. Realize that a manufacturer, think about this, the manufacturer and the end user, they want the same thing. The manufacturer and the end user want to be able to buy these goods out of as many possible outlets as they can. The manufacturer's success comes into selling as many items as they can. The intermediaries in the middle, however, got it stuck a little bit. They want to be able to sell, but they want to be able to sell everything within their given trade area, and they want to sell as many different items as they can in their trade area because they want to cover all of the particular market segments that might desire a television. Yeah, I'm fine with the lesser expensive television. It saves me 150 bucks. I can't tell the difference. No, I would like to go with the OLED, even though it's going to be $200 more because I can significantly see the difference. And especially for live events, I'm going to want that as well. And so this is the mindset between those two locations and why there is sometimes that chance for conflict. Finally, if we're talking about convenience goods, because they're sold from the closest location, you want to have them in as many outlets as you possibly can. And so a convenience item, if it is sold by its shape and its color, and you're not using a central route to be able to make decisions, in other words, you're not hardwired in to make deep decisions because who makes a deep decision about a candy bar? Usually what we use peripheral cues like size and shape and color to make those choices. Given that those particular convenience goods, all we care about is locating in as many locations as consumers can find. All right. And the convenience stores don't care because the central thing that they're giving you is convenience. So generally the price is marked up significantly. Intensive distribution, depending on the items, it is not surprising a convenience store will sell them for greater amounts than the shopping, or excuse me, the supermarket that's right across the street. And so where Lowe's Foods, right across the street is a convenience store. And I've walked into that store and bought a 20-ounce Coke and then walked across the street to Lowe's and seen a 2-liter bottle for $1 less. They both have different missions. One is for encouragement of shopping and the other is strictly for convenience. Now, as I said before, conflict is built within the supply chain system. The end users who perform channel functions and the manufacturers both have the same mission. They want to have as many places as they possibly can to have those particular goods sold. And the manufacturer just wants them sold. And once they're sold, all they're worried about is, will the next one be sold? This basically builds, it bakes in conflict. Each firm has its own goals, its own reasons for existence. The difference between a Bucky's, if anyone has had the dubious honor of going in a Bucky's, is so fundamentally different than the truck stop across the street. Even though they're in the same business, they have different goals and objectives. Now think about this people who sell gas to a Bucky's versus those who would sell to a QT. Entirely different reasons for existence. The manufacturers want to be able to sell as many items as they can. The intermediaries want to control an area. And so these are the natural places and stages where conflict begins and ends. How do you protect it? What you hope to have is a mutual interdependence, a desire to be able to maintain your particular relationship so that firms will not try to seek their own self-interest, but hopefully band together for your own mutual benefit. And there are many ways that they can do this in a successful way. One day I'll talk about franchising in terms of a strategy, but what you want to be able to do is build what we call golden handcuffs. In other words, it is you lose so much more for giving up the relationship versus staying together. And so, given that, we have 5 sources of power that exists within the channel system. All right. These 5 sources of power. One is legitimate power. Legitimate power is actually in 2 different forms. There is traditional legitimate power, which is the societal norms in which we live in which the assumption of shaking a hand means that there is the obligation within the social norms that you're going to fulfill your promises. That's traditional legitimate. Legal legitimate power is the power that is conferred by governments when it comes to signing documents that attest to your commitment. So traditional and legal. Reward power is exactly what it sounds like. It is the ability of one of the channel partners to be able to convey benefits on a channel member in the promotion or the production of a positive, as a positive movement. The difficulty with reward power, of course, is like going to your child and saying, if you do your homework, I'll give you a cookie. What happens ultimately is the next day they'll come back and say, I did my homework, where's my cookie? The difficulty with reward power is that it tends to be difficult and never ending. Coercive power tends to be thought of as the exact opposite, but it's not really. Coercive power is the ability to deliver punishment in the failure of performing a function. The difficulty with coercive power is it is not the same as withholding a benefit. We look at coercive power as an attack on us personally, and it can be the subject to attacks or counterattacks as well. And so coercive power has to be used very carefully. Information power, or what's known as expertise power, is the ability to have special knowledge and capabilities that your channel partners consider desirable and important. The difficulty with expert power, expertise, or information power is that it's very easy for us to be able to grab that particular piece of information, and then now I have the power. Expertise power, expert information power requires a constant reinvestment of education so that you still have that particular power. The last is referent power, and referent power is the desire to be channel partners with someone who is universally looked at as a benefit and the desire that wished to be seen with that particular corporation. So when I was the store manager in Lafayette, Louisiana, of a computer store, one of the things that I pushed for is that we became a vendor of IBM. I didn't stay there long enough. It was a 20-page um, application I had started to fill out. But just to have those three big blue letters when you're starting out like that is an enormous advantage. And so these are the powers that work through the channel system, and how we're able to use those powers to its better benefit ultimately helps us to determine whether or not we're going to have success. So, what are the trends in supply chain? So, one of those happens to be, you'll find this out when you're, especially because you're in the MBAs now. One of the things that you might see hammered again and again while you're going through your master's classes is they say focus on whatever is your particular core competency, what you do best, and everything else you buy from someone else. This is what we call in channels the make or buy decision. What do we consider our assets that are strategically important? And let's focus on those and not worry about anything else. The outsourcing of those channel functions is very much in the same way. Can I get someone else to do these particular functions so that I don't have to do them myself? It's called the make or buy decision. How do I make a choice? Well, you always start in the buy decision. In other words, you always start by buying another product and you focusing on whatever your particular core competency is. Now, here's the thing. Delivery might be your core competency, in which case you do not want to give that up. And so outsourcing is the de facto standard in which you're working from. But if it is a strategic asset, you wish to do your own work. Okay. So RFID is radio frequency identification. I have been watching Walmart for 20 years try to come up with a way of being able to effectively do RFID in a retail environment. They get real close, they just don't have it. And so life goes on. We may not see a practical example or use of RFID. One day we might. So non-traditional channels is valid and very important, but I want to talk about the most valued one to ever come around, and this is the one that I wish us to talk about right now. So, way back in 2009, I was teaching a sales management class at Louisiana Tech. It was my first year in getting my PhD. So we were getting into a conversation and we were talking about smartphones. So it's hard to see, okay, but this is my smartphone. And I happen to have at that time a Zenith. I can't remember what I had. The Moto one. Anyway, I was talking. There it goes. Hush, be quiet. Anyway, I was talking to the individuals in that class, and I was very curious about, how, like what everyone has. And I asked somebody, how many of y'all have a smartphone? Every student in 2009 said they had a smartphone. And I realized something had happened, something that I didn't realize, something important. I would also say that this spurred the revolution that we have had in place and we're still catching up. So what do I mean? Let's kind of dial this back. We're going to talk about the omni-channel. So hold on just one second. Let me kind of get this slide here and let me kind of explain, do some splaining about the omni-channel. So The traditional single channel retail environment is exactly what it sounds like. It's where the consumer basically has one way in which they interact with their particular outlets. And so if I were looking at a pharmacy at the bottom and the consumer up here at the top, I guess those are shopping bags. I can't understand why it'd be either one. In the most traditional sense, the single channel environment would be where the consumer goes to a pharmacy, they look for their medications and their goods, they go through the counter, they leave, and that, in essence, is the way that they interact with their particular pharmacy. Now, let's step and say that there's more than one way. And is there? Absolutely. We have had multi channels since time immemorial. All right. The multi channel is exactly what it sounds like. It is more than one way in which the consumer interacts with and gets goods delivered to them. And so, in a multi channel environment, let's think of it this way: a person would go to the doctor, the doctor would prescribe medications. The medications would then go to the pharmacy. And then what would happen, especially if the patient had to be an invalid or not allowed to go shopping on themselves, they would actually, the pharmacies would drive those goods to the consumer's place. This went on, I can't tell you, it started as soon as vehicles were allowed. Pharmacies would regularly put all of the requirements for their particular customers together. Also, if the customer needed to shop, pharmacies used to know their customers so intimately that my grandmother could call the pharmacy and say, I need some birthday cards for my grandchildren. Could you throw in a few? And the pharmacy would do that. There was that closeness or the connection. And so the multi-channel is basically the way that multiple ways in which the consumer could interact. Now, let's not worry about cross channels because that's not important. The thing about multi channels is that it was very much siloed in its way. It was more than one delivery system, but it did not have the untold benefits that the omni channel has. So the omni channel as a word, as a word came out in 2003. It was by Best Buy. And what Best Buy was wanting to do is they were wanting to counteract the consumer's ability to see multiple things from a given Walmart. That's what they were supposed to be for. Okay. Well, it went much further than that because what Best Buy wanted to do was it wanted to make the experience looking at on their phone very similar to the experience of actually going in. And before you know it, once you had the right device, our little cell phones here, our smartphones, to be able to coordinate all those things together, that we had the true advent of the omni-channel experience. The omni-channel is the experiential benefits of multiple outlets driven beginning and end by the consumer building those channels. So I want you to think about it, okay? The consumer builds the experience from beginning to end in a far more intimate way than multi-channels could ever touch. And so let me give an example of this, okay? So I bought a 75-inch television. I would know, I'm talking a lot about TVs. I bought a 75-inch television as my gift to myself when I achieved tenure. All right. So Dr. Albinson readily agreed with it because she hadn't seen it. And she said yes before she actually saw it. When we got home, she went, oh my God, she loves it now. Don't get me wrong. Anyway, 75-inch television. How do I go about the process? The first thing is that I start doing research on my smartphone. And for me, one of those things I'm a really, I'll go ahead and say it, I'm anal about is the information. So I love to just pick through even the smallest little details, pieces of information. And so I start that process on the Omni channel. I don't necessarily go to Best Buy or Walmart or those online places. I go to where I think it's good, influencers whose opinion I trust. And so once I start working through there, then I start looking at what brands or models I think I like the most. And so I'm definitely good on Samsung. I'm definitely good on LG's. I'm not looking at the others. I'm trying to decide whether I can afford QLED or OLED, and I decide that I can. The next thing that I have to do is think about is how do I go about distributing, and that's where I start looking at Best Buy and I look at Walmart and I look at the others. Finally, I decide on the brand that I want, and then I'm trying to think about who do I buy it from. So when I make my final choice between a Samsung and an LG, Samsung and a Sony, I go to Walmart directly because I can actually see the videos there and I can understand the differences between which one I want. That's when I chose Walmart. Walmart to buy the unit because the last thing I had was delivery. And what Walmart offered me is direct to the home delivery. And then the deliverer did something really nice for me. He actually brought the good inside, helped me take it out, and made sure it was secure before I left. I didn't ask for that, but that guy got a 5-star rating for that. I really appreciated it, and I let Walmart go, let Walmart know. Now, all of this tells you that as a consumer, I drove the entire process. The entire, from beginning to end, was mine. I was the one who was the driver of that from beginning to end. I built it in my own way. And that is a critical thing about the Omni channel is the entire experience was built by me. And so the Omni channel has been the single greatest change in technology in the last 20 to 25 years. And it waited for one singular event, the smartphone, to be able to bring it to where it is. And now the omni-channel is now considered almost the de facto way. We're even talking about the ability to deliver education in an omni-channel way as well. But simply what it states is, once again, because marketing is context driven, as Jag Sheth would say so often, as the context changed in the way that consumers desired their particular goods, we changed along with it. And so this is the Omni channel, what its advantages are, why it was able to drive so much value for us. And it all came down to Best Buy wanting to create this unique customer experience to compete with Walmart, where they decided to center more around the customer in both the in-store and the online experience while providing all of that together. And they came up with the phrase assembled commerce. In other words, you put all of these things together, and the result is we have the success that we have now, and it will stay that way for itself. In other words, the consumer built their own purchase path from beginning to end. And this is what makes the omni-channel so great. It's why I love being in place. We are the brave new world, and it all started with the omni-channel. Okay, I'm waxing too philosophic. Let me go ahead and finish just to show you this last slide and understand that those things that can be replicated and are not considered a strategic competitive advantage, that ultimately the advantages of outsourcing those are far superior to us doing them ourselves, unless, as I said, they are strategically important to us. If you were to go to any universities, you would find that many universities now have someone who runs their commissaries, their food. All right. Cisco and some of the others now do all of that for them. You'll also find that in many university libraries, that Barnes and Noble might be running those as well, because that is their core functions and they do them well. All right. What makes App State different is that we consider our local support and our commitment to the people in the town that we live in to be valued for us. And that's why we have our own library and we have our own commissary, and why we're committed to buying goods in the community itself, because we consider that important to the general strategic mission of App State. And so this is why you see this slow movement of information technology moving down. You see the administration and support processors being carried on by organizations that are familiar with those and can do them far better than we can. And what you see in the long run is that organizations move to only focus on their core functions, those things that they do well or better than anyone else, and ultimately use those as a pathway to their futures. And so channels is the most expensive. Channels is the most difficult to change. And yet the brave new world is in channels. And so without further ado, I am about to run out of voice. I think we have covered this sufficiently as I could possibly do in about, in an hour and 10 minutes. But this is where we are, the brave new world of the omni-channel. And it is really now one of the great sources of competitive advantages that you still have, especially in a world where we tend to copy everything that we have, and we take products and we throw them all in the same bin. Our ability to deliver those goods at the right times, at the right moments, at the right sizes is a major source of competitive advantage if we know how to do it well. All right, folks. We're done. Hopefully the weather will be great Thursday, because I fully expect to be back in the classroom. I will have these things posted. We're still cruising towards February 18th to be our test. Anything else while I'm still talking? Anything? I'm guessing we're all good. So I'm going to exit out. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the class on Thursday, folks. Okay? All right, folks. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
yourself. Thank you. Enjoy yourself.